Right. Well, I think as everyone's introducing themselves, um, welcome. We'll go ahead and get started here. Good morning. I'm Efrat Pfefferman. I'm the Executive Director of United Way of Monroe County, and welcome to Wake Up with United Way. This is a series we're doing every second Thursday morning of the month in collaboration with the IU PACE Political and Civic Engagement Program. Series sponsorship by the Bloomington Board of Realtors and the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. And this particular session today is also sponsored by the IU Center for the Study of Global Change. And we'll hear from some of our friends over there in this program today. So a big thank you to all of our sponsors, a big thank you to all of you who could be here this morning, and a big thanks to our panelists who I'll introduce in just a moment. This series is intended to help us delve into topics that may be affecting our neighbors, our community, and allow us to showcase an issue and how it's being worked on by often nonprofits, IU, other institutions, government partners, and many others in collaboration. So the topic today is a heavy one. It's combating human trafficking. But I think this is one that, you know, for me personally, I'm just really interested to learn more, to maybe dispel some myths that I think we are all subject to on, you know, media and other outlets that maybe take a, you know, a certain spin on a topic like this. But and I think we'll also hear how it hits home and what resources there are available to victims or people who want to support others in their journey of recovery from something like this. And we'll also talk about how you can get more involved in advocating for human rights, for legislation and programs that support victims and their recovery from trafficking. So I'm delighted this morning to welcome several esteemed panelists. We have with us Elaine Banter from Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. We have Lindsey Stout from United Way member agency Middle Way House. We have Deb Getz from the IU School of Public Health. And we have Eli Conwest from the IU School of Global and International Studies and the Center for the Study of Global Change. And I think I'll turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves a little more personally and say a little bit more about what they do, what their organization does. And then we'll get a little bit into the substance of this topic in the introduction, but then we'll also, we'll dive in deeper, and then we'll allow some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions as you're thinking about this conversation, feel free to put it in the Q&A box or the chat box. You're also welcome to share resources in the chat box. And of course, if you're joining late, please say hi in the chat feature. So I'll turn it over to our panelists. I think, are we starting with you, Elaine?
Excellent. Hi, I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. So excited to be here with you all this morning. Again, my name's Elaine Banter. I am with the Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program. So my role there is I am a regional coalition coordinator. And what that means is we are broken up in 10 regions across the state. And within Region 7, I serve 9 counties. And our top 2 goals are to, one, facilitate training and education about human trafficking. So exactly what we're doing today. We work with just about everybody, but we have training specifically designed for healthcare providers, educators, service providers, youth and law enforcement. And another big part of what we do is we are building a network of service providers who are equipped to identify and respond to trafficking. So we have lots of different ways that we can partner and work alongside people so that we're effectively doing that and making it basically too hard to traffic people in Indiana. So that's my ITVAP hat. I also sit on the Indiana Protection Against Trafficked Humans Task Force on probably too many working groups, but I very much enjoy doing that as well. We'll share about that today. And I also am a coach with the Allies Mentorship Program. So that program matches youth who have experienced sexual exploitation with a mentor in the community. And so I serve as a coach supporting some of those relationships as well. I think that's all. I'm also a yoga instructor. Hope to continue to learn how to do trauma-informed yoga and maybe do some yoga with some of these populations as well. So that's me. Very excited to be here and be with a lovely group of people.
Indeed. Thank you, Elaine. Lindsey?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'm Lindsey. I work at Middleway House. I'm the Crisis Intervention Services Coordinator Assistant, nice long-winded title. But basically I help run our crisis line and on-scene advocacy programs. And I'm gonna tell you guys all about all the different services we offer at Middleway House a little bit later. I'm just here trying to represent a nonprofit and a service in the community that can really directly help survivors of trafficking. But yeah, my role is to keep the crisis line going and the on-scene advocacy program going, which lately we've been just seeing really high numbers of sexual assaults in the community, things like that. So great need. I also help manage all of our volunteers and interns on the crisis line and OSA programs and do community education. So that's me, and I'll tell more about Middleway House in a bit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Deb, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you. So my name is Deb Getz. I am an associate clinical faculty member in the School of Public Health here in Bloomington, and I have two primary areas of focus. The first one is I teach in our youth development major and minor, and the primary goal there is to help folks understand the skills and knowledge required to help youth become the best they can be, which is certainly much more than a background check and a driver's license, which tends to be all we require in many of our youth serving agencies. And I also am focused on identifying ways in which we can bring folks together to serve the needs of children and youth and adults who may have been trafficked. I too sit on the IPATH task force, and I sit specifically on the Community Awareness, Prevention, and Education Committee. And then I've been involved with a number of grants over the years to really engage in our community and help educate folks.
Thank you. And I think you'll share a current one with us later. Excellent. I'll turn it to you, Eli.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eli Conwest. I'm the interim director at the Center for the Study of Global Change at IU. And our mission at the Global Center is to promote international and global studies topics to everyone at IU and beyond. And one of our topics that we focus on right now is combating human trafficking. We work with a nonprofit partner, the Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice. We have a practicum for students, volunteer opportunities for students, and we are currently working with Deb Getz on a anti-human trafficking effort with the Center for Rural Engagement. So we're happy for anyone to intersect with this efforts and can contact us for more information.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, let's dive in, and I think we may have some slides that help with going through this program, but just at the basic level, what is human trafficking? Who are the traffickers? Who are the victims? Can you paint a picture for us?
Yeah, I can kind of dive into that. So human trafficking, and we have a few slides that can help support this visually. Human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into any form of work or service against their will. So basically forcing someone into work against their will, making it so they can't leave. And so when we talk about those pieces, force, fraud, and coercion, some examples of those, a lot of times our mind first goes to that force piece, but the fraud and coercion are really, really important to highlight as well. Fraud could include maybe lying to someone about what that job entails. That could include maybe someone coming from another country withholding their documentation from them or lying to them about the documentation process. The coercion piece is really important as well. That's often the strongest piece that can keep someone in that situation. That involves that climate of fear, that emotional abuse. If you've worked with domestic violence in any setting, it looks very similar to that, in that on the outside looking in, it can be really frustrating. Why aren't these people leaving this situation? But that is often the strongest piece that kind of holds them where they are. So that's a little bit about the definition of trafficking. As far as who are the traffickers. So I think a really important, maybe like myth busting moment that's really important is the relationship is often someone that person knows, is really close with. Love is often a piece of that relationship. So a lot of times we see information about kidnapping or someone's thrown in a van and taken away and never seen again. That's not a super accurate picture of what we see in trafficking. It's most commonly immediate family or romantic partnerships, things like that. So, and then you asked who are the victims. Unfortunately, and this goes for traffickers or victims, I meant to say this right away, can be anybody. Can be anybody. And I think that's often the most shocking part for people too. But when we talk about victims, there of course are populations that are more vulnerable to being trafficked. Some of those include LGBTQIA+ youth, youth of color, people of color, youth who have any experience with the system, and runaway and homeless youth is a really, really big one as well. I'd love to share too a little bit with you about the AMP model. This is basically what our federal law says makes something human trafficking. So it's kind of a nice way of viewing it in a little graph version. And so what we need is an action, a means, and a purpose. So the actions can include transportation, which again is often what we hear about, someone being moved across borders or moved from place to place. And so, but that's only one action. Harbors is just above that. People can actually be trafficked out of one space and not be moved around at all. And then we also have patronizes and solicits on there. That's referring to anyone buying or consuming services from someone else. So you have a trafficker, a victim, and a buyer or consumer. They may be buying sex or labor. They can also be charged with trafficking.
Okay.
The means is that force, fraud, and coercion piece we talked about. And then the purpose is labor or services or commercial sexual conduct. So that is the breakdown between labor and sex trafficking, the two main types of trafficking we have in Indiana.
Okay.
Again, one item from each column with one exception. When we're talking about sex trafficking, if that person is a minor, they are automatically a victim of sex trafficking if they're involved in commercial sex. So that means there's no such thing as a juvenile prostitute. If they are under 18 and they are involved in commercial sex, which means something of value is exchanged for a sex act, that could be money, a place to stay, drugs, anything. That's commercial sex, and they're automatically a victim of sex trafficking. That's hugely important when we, with the language we use when we're working with victims and survivors, but also just to understand what our law says. So in those cases, the means column disappears. We don't have to prove force, fraud, and coercion in those cases. Labor trafficking, no matter the age, we always do. I haven't been keeping great track of time. I was going to hopefully do all that in 5 minutes. Good. I think that kind of covers, what our federal law says it is. The definition's pretty vague on purpose. Human trafficking super complicated, and I hope that we can kind of hash out some of those answers today. And yeah, I hope that answered a few questions to start us off.
Absolutely, that was great. And I think maybe that can help us segue a little bit into the local picture here, because you talked briefly about in Indiana the two primary ways that we see this. So Lindsey, can I turn it over to you to tell us about the resources for victims that we have here in Monroe County?
Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about Middleway House. Our goal is to end violence in the lives of all people, and we do that by offering lots and lots of different really vital services to individuals affected by intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. Those are our three categories we focus on. We're based out of Bloomington, as I'm sure many of you know, but we do have outreach offices in Owen County, Greene County, and Martin County, because we know those rural areas are often really forgotten, especially in something like human trafficking. So first, I'm going to go over kind of all the different services we offer, and then I want to talk about how DB shelters, us in particular here in Bloomington, are kind of specially equipped to help survivors of trafficking.
Great.
So yeah, so just we have our 24-hour crisis line, and that number is there. We have our 24-hour on-scene advocacy program, and through that we can go to the hospital, the police station, or the clerk's office, or see anyone here, of course, when they're in moments of acute trauma, and that's any day of the year, 24 hours. We have legal advocacy, which we find is huge. It's just absolutely vital to have accessible, free, confidential legal help when you're navigating things like this. The legal system can be confusing enough, but when you're in trauma, it's a whole other thing. So we're not lawyers, but we can help you with protective orders, divorces, family and child law, go with you to court, things like that. And then, of course, we have emergency shelter for people who are actively fleeing domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking. And then we have affordable transitional housing. Maybe some of you have heard of the RISE. That's a more long-term housing solution for men or women with children. We have a whole array of prevention education where we go into elementary through high school and teach them our program called Building Healthy Relationships, trying to get to the root of all these things before they begin. And then here in shelter and at the RISE, we have childcare, which we also find is a really huge piece to helping people kind of regain their independence, be able to go to work, things like that. Childcare is a must. We have resident advocacy here, case management for residents. And also I added triage there, which is case management for individuals who are not living in shelter, but they're experiencing these things. There's often a huge need for housing and other things like that for people who might not need shelter, but they need support in that way. So you can go on to the next slide. So how are we specially equipped to kind of help with trafficking? There are actually some really profound similarities between the experiences of domestic violence and human trafficking. Like Elaine was saying, they're often hurt by someone who they see as their intimate partner. They see this person as their boyfriend, or, you know, so often here we see that it's parents, things like that. There's a cycle of violence that the survivor goes through. There's often a need for safe emergency housing, and there's often the need for help rebuilding their life and regaining their independence in general, which often looks like help finding housing, help getting a job, help with childcare, just these very basic needs that we're already equipped to help people with who are experiencing domestic violence. And we're kind of uniquely suited to serve these survivors of trafficking because our staff is specially educated on intimate partner violence. we focus a lot on the dynamics of abusive relationships, which the relationship between the trafficker and the survivor is often an abusive relationship. We have a deep understanding of safety, okay? Confidentiality is our highest concern. And that is so vital when you're working with trafficking survivors. A lot of them are really worried about being found and things like this, just like somebody would be in a domestic violence relationship. And again, just coming back to these holistic services, I mean, we have to look at the whole picture. In providing childcare and legal and case management, we're kind of addressing the whole person. And then, of course, our services are all trauma-informed, which you don't find everywhere. And that is another just really vital piece of working with survivors of trafficking. It's a very traumatic experience. And then we acknowledge the nuances and differences between trafficking and voluntary sex work, which is something that we see a lot, and it's really important to acknowledge the differences with adults. So that is a little bit about Middleway House and what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you
yeah.
for being a resource in our community. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, that's great. And there's a question, Deb, before I over to you. Elaine mentioned a couple types of human trafficking in Indiana, sex and labor trafficking. Are those the only forms that we should be aware of? So Deb, I don't know if you want to touch on it or we throw it back to Elaine for just a second, but either one of you, I bet could answer that.
I'm happy to answer that. So those are the two main types that we see in Indiana, yes. As far as types of human trafficking, there are other ways that trafficking can take form. One of those is forced marriage. So sometimes folks are still today forced into a marriage. The basis of that marriage is exploitation. That is not arranged marriage. Arranged marriage is practiced culturally in lots of spaces. That is consensual on both parties. Everyone involved is consenting to that. Forced marriage is when someone is forced to marry someone for the purposes of exploitation, whether that's for sex, labor, whatever it is. So that's just one other example how trafficking can kind of take other forms. That's again why that definition is pretty broad. It just includes forcing someone to do something they don't want to do and making it so they can't leave. I hope that's helpful. I don't want to take too much time on that, but I hope that answers that question. But we mostly see sex and labor trafficking in some form, often both together. So I hope that's helpful for that.
Thank you. And yeah, and if attendees have any questions, type them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we'll work them into our discussion here. But Deb, let me turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about your work and partnerships and anything else you want to touch upon here.
Sure. I want to kind of bring in the child-specific component. Mm-hmm. As Elaine said, and as Lindsey really outlined, this very much addresses or can occur with folks across the lifespan. And as we stop and try and understand the impact of human trafficking, we really need to understand that trafficking can occur at any age. And it is important to understand that sometimes the relationships that ultimately are grooming relationships or relationships that are intended solely to gain the trust and confidence of a victim can happen over months or years. This isn't, again, as something Elaine said, that happens overnight. While that may happen, it's very rare. It is much more common for folks to be trafficked by family or friends, neighbors, folks who they've had this ongoing relationship with. It's also critical to understand that our stereotypes about trafficking are really wrong in a lot of ways when it comes to how the news media presents it. It is not isolated to folks of particular socioeconomic status. It can also happen across that entire realm. One of the challenges we have, certainly now, it's even been made worse, is the use of the internet as a tool to recruit or to coerce humans into trafficking situations. And so it's really critical that families, anybody who has young people in their lives is really paying attention. We've heard the same kind of things over and over again. It's critical to know where youth are engaging online. It's critical to say very clearly and very often, there's nothing you can do online that you can't share with me. And if you feel something in your gut that says that this is a bad communication you're having with someone, let me know, we'll work it out together. As both Lindsey and Elaine alluded to, it's about relationships. And a lot of times when kids are looking for positive relationships, it becomes very obvious, and traffickers can see that. They're very aware psychologically of what to look for. People who want connections, people who might need housing, people who may feel like they need more money. And again, in our current environment, those are all very concerning topics and issues we have to be aware of. We also need to understand that as folks, as unemployment goes up, as we remember we still have an opioid crisis, as we still address some of the other challenges during a pandemic, it's really critical to understand a lot of those pieces might be connected as well to opportunities for trafficking. Iris Kiesling identified a wonderful question, and we've actually been fairly gender neutral in our comments because absolutely her question is very important. Trafficking happens among both men and women. Kids of both genders. We know that kids who fit into our LGBTQ+I audiences are also more likely to be trafficked. And so we need to remember that while, again, the news tells us that it's women and most folks will talk about women, I think it's very underreported among men and young men. And then the last piece is we continue to move forward. Two quick things. Number one, we need to understand that the internet really is a central place for that extortion, for that coercion. And a lot of times it starts very, very basically, and then individuals might be told to meet up, or they might be asked to share imagery. And any image of any human under the age of 18 that is sexual in nature is identified as child sexual abuse imagery. And it is against the law. It is not to be shared electronically. And that's an important part of understanding trafficking and pathways into potentially being trafficked. And then if you'll slide over to the slide with the map, one is painful every time I look at it. This is a heat map that indicates the concentration of trafficking reports as identified by the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And you can see that Indiana is, at least we can see a little bit of its outline. You can definitely see Indianapolis up closer to Muncie, Fort Wayne. Those are redder areas, a lot more intense. You can also see there's a small red area closer to Bloomington, and those show population centers. Again, Indiana is both a rural and an urban community or state, and it's critical that we understand where we have humans, we're gonna have trafficking. And with that, I think we can go back, look for any additional questions, and maybe we can also talk about that grant opportunity if you want. Yeah. So I am partnering in my work with the School of Global and International Studies and the Center for the Study of Global Change, which is what Eli is current interim director for that program. And together we are working with the Center for Rural Engagement, which is also an IU entity, and we've partnered with Engage Together, which is a national organization to end human trafficking. And you can see our goal here is to build alliances, assess current resources, develop action plans, and then engage specifically in the 3 counties of Brown, Greene, and Putnam to put together a number of resources and understand what those rural communities have, what they would like to have, and then how we can respond to them. Eli, you want to add anything in there? She loves it when I call her.
I think Deb summed up the project nicely. We are starting with these 3 counties, Brown, Greene, and Putnam, in our collaboration with the Center for Rural Engagement at IU. After we do these 3 counties, we will be looking for additional grant funds to expand the project and take what we've learned in these 3 counties and start applying them outwardly into other counties, including Monroe County. So we're hoping that this project expands in the future and we can take our lessons learned here and continue to improve our model and make it better. So if you're not in one of those 3 counties, but you'd still like to engage in this project, we'd like to hear from you.
Great, and we've got a question about what other counties you're going for. So do you have a target beyond those, or remains to be seen?
It does remain to be seen. So we haven't identified the next 3 counties that of interest. As we start really the data heavy collection component of this current project, we'll be looking to see where the connections are, maybe somewhere of the more obvious next steps will be. So we might see that 2 counties have very similar issues, so it might make sense to move there. Or there's a lot of connections between people engaged in anti-human trafficking efforts between 2 counties, and so it may make sense to move there. So as we collect data for these 3 initial counties, we'll identify the next logical steps.
Great.
And part of the reason for our effort in these counties was we saw significant increases in what's known as the CHINS rate, or Children in Need of Services rate. And those are kids for some reason who need extra care, either to stay in the home or to be removed from the home. And those rates ranged from increases in 1 year from 86% to 178% in these 3 counties. And from 2017 to 2018, which, as you may recall, was very much tied to what we were seeing with the public health crisis of opioid abuse. And we know that there are definitely resources across our state. One of the challenges, and Elaine deals with this every day, Lindsey sees it in the counties with which she engages. One of the challenges we know is there are resources, but we're working on coordinating those in much more intentional ways, bringing folks together, and the opportunities that are out there set us up for success. And so the partnership between the School of Public Health and the Hamilton's Lugar School of Global and International Studies, along with, as you can see, these other folks, is really an opportunity to bring those folks together, leverage the resources of all of them, and find ways to address the needs in our smaller counties now, but certainly as we can expand in the future. The other huge piece for us is that we're looking to identify ways to capture better data about the incidents of trafficking and child sexual exploitation across the state of Indiana. And that is an important goal. As you might imagine, that's not an easy number to come by. And so it's one that we're really starting to break down and create plans and seek funding to better identify as we move forward.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I think we're getting close to Q&A time, and I encourage the audience to enter their questions in the chat or Q&A box. And while we do that, let me ask you a couple questions. I'll pose it to the entire panel, and anyone can jump in. So first, I guess, just in practical terms, if one of us suspects something is going on in the family next door, or someone we encounter in the community, or if someone confides in us, what do we do? How do we help?
I'll start it off and then hand it off. I think the biggest thing is to trust your gut. That's one of the things that I always am trying to remind the students with whom I engage, and to remind the professionals that your knowledge is there and you need to use that as a tool to act. And if the individual is under 18, then your call can be to local law enforcement. It also should include a phone call to the Department of Child Services. And it's critical when you make that call for Department of Child Services that you indicate that you suspect human trafficking. As soon as you say that, then that initiates a whole different set of questions in an effort to capture the information needed to initiate the investigation in the proper way. The other thing is that those calls to DCS can be confidential or they can be open, and we ask folks to consider sharing their personal information and contact information, so that if the individuals that are doing the research or the investigation have additional questions, they can call. The big issue is it's not your job to do the investigation. It's your job to capture information and hand that information over to the proper authorities. The other big number is the one that we have to share with folks and has just been shared in the chat, and that is that National Human Trafficking Hotline number. And they are also there to assist.
Thank you. And others, jump in, please.
Yeah, I just think that if you suspect someone's being trafficked, one of the best things you can do is empower them with resources. At Middleway House, we base all of our services off something called the empowerment model. And with trafficking survivors, all of their power has been taken away. And we believe that arming them with tools and resources and information kind of puts the ball back in their court. It puts the power in their hands. We're saying you get to decide now what you want to do with your life. Here's things that can help you. Here are relevant resources, whether that's our services, Elaine's, whoever, just really equipping them with the knowledge to make their own decisions.
Yeah, I just want to echo all the lovely things that have been said. So from Deb's perspective of just as a community member, if it's someone you don't know, you're just seeing something, it's unfortunately never a safe space to intervene or do anything. That can put them in danger, that could put you in danger. That may feel like a discouraging answer, but reporting as a community member really is the most important piece, both for youth through the DCS hotline and adults through the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They are super helpful resources as well, and just making sure when you call DCS to explain that you suspect it's human trafficking. Super huge, just as you see things or understand things, even if you don't have very much information, that's really hugely important. And then in Lindsey's perspective, as a service provider, or if you are someone in their life, someone that cares about them, choice is huge. Choice is really huge. So like she was saying, empowering them with resources and giving them choices on what that looks like. A lot of folks, sometimes you see the word rescue or things like that. A lot of times people in trafficking don't understand that they are a victim of anything, let alone what human trafficking is. They may not feel they need anything. So saying, well, don't you want my help? I'm rescuing you out of some situation will not resonate or go over super well. So yeah, just wanted to echo what they said about what to do. Report. And if it's someone you love and care about, provide them with helpful resources.
Very good. And we're sharing a lot of helpful resources in the chat box. So we'll also email this out to all the attendees and the community after this. So this is good stuff. And we have another question. So how often do you all panelists collaborate with each other and support each other's specific efforts? And with a victim, is there handing off, from one to the other? Do you kind of all have your own roles? Could you paint that picture for us a little more?
I'll start just because we are not a direct service provider, and what you just said is exactly what we want to do. We want to collaborate with people like Middleway House, who are providing amazing direct services to victims and survivors. So if we get calls, we immediately are calling Middleway House or whatever it is that's closest to them, that makes sense for them, what has the things they need. And so if that doesn't directly provide services, we're working to connect all of the services together, because not only is it so underreported reported, but navigating where am I supposed to go next? What can I get here? What can I do there is half the battle. So that's actually a big part of what we want to do. So we work closely with Middle Way House on that. I work with Deb in lots of lovely ways. She collaborates with ITVAP in lots of amazing ways. So I'll let everyone else kind of input to that. But the answer is yes and often.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, my role is one of as an educator, and I think it's critical that when we educate students that we help them understand what's happening in the communities, and so community engagement is an essential part of how we teach. My perspective is one that ties to resource identification, helping to maximize the resources we have, identifying resources that we can bring in to partner with existing agencies. And I think a significant connection to how we work with the community is understanding what's out there and reinforcing that these relationships are ones of control and power. And as we educate students in the classroom, but also folks in the community, we have to remind them that when people feel out of control, and goodness gracious, in a world of a pandemic, there's not a lot of control to be had. When they feel unsafe and when they feel like they're stuck in relationships that are power oriented, that can be how we know we need to make sure humans get connected back to those community-based services. And the resources at Middle Way House are excellent resources for the folks here in Monroe County, and as you saw, for other ones. I'll let that one go back to Lindsey.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. But I just want to echo everything Elaine said too. I mean, for example, she's giving our whole staff a training later today. So yeah, we do collaborate when possible.
Excellent. Yeah, it's great to see, and I think we picked a good panel to round out all these different roles as you work on this topic together. There's another question coming in about what's the most common recruitment method? Anyone? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead. I would say the most common recruitment methods. And when we talk about recruitment, we're also talking about grooming, right? So as Deb talked about earlier, this process usually takes a long time. So months to years can happen just building a relationship with someone, just grooming a person. Now, we talked about earlier, a lot of times traffickers are immediate family members. Imagine how much easier it is to groom someone and build their trust when it's literally built in because you were born into that family. So if it's not an immediate family member, a lot of times it is that romantic partnership. Someone becomes their best friend. We have lots of situations that we could go on and share. But so I want to say recruitment can oftentimes be a relationship. Someone is, and this is how we often empower youth to understand that you are in a really awesome seat to prevent trafficking. If you can help your friend identify an unhealthy relationship that's coming into their life, you can prevent it from even happening. And so that's really huge. But another big thing when we talk about recruitment is, this was alluded to earlier as well, as online. That is so huge. So much trafficking takes place online. When we talk about who the buyers are, it really makes a lot of sense, right? So they don't want people to know what they're doing. And so a lot of times those transactions happen online. And so the recruitment can take place online, the transactions can take place online. And now, I mean, we are living in the most digitally focused world we ever have right now. And so that's just a huge thing to be aware of as well. So through relationships is how people are recruited. And I hate calling it relationships, but exploitative relationships, but that's how they appear. And through online are some of the biggest spaces. And when I say online, anywhere where people can talk to people, we've seen it, Fortnite, gaming systems like Snapchat, Instagram, all of it. And so yeah, I hope that's helpful to answer that question. Anybody else may chime in.
Just to echo that from the middle way perspective, I mean, we almost never see someone kind of recruited. It's almost always a grooming situation. And it's a boyfriend, it's parents. I mean, more often than not, when we see trafficking, it's parents. So there's not much recruiting that has to be done when it's someone as trusted as, you know, mom or dad. So, but yeah.
And is that, does that go for sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking? We have a question about resources for victims of labor trafficking, if you want to segue to that.
Okay. I'll let somebody else speak on that.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering if when you say parents, is that the same in labor versus sex trafficking? And someone else can jump in and try to answer that.
I think so. I mean, at Middle Way, we don't, we definitely see labor trafficking. And that is different for sure. We don't see that happening quite as much with the intimate partner type relationship. When we see labor trafficking, it more so occurs when someone's experiencing poverty and they get taken advantage of because of their vulnerable position in that way.
And what resources are available for someone who's experiencing labor trafficking in our community?
I'll kind of speak to that labor trafficking piece too as well. We have a lot of agricultural jobs in Indiana. A lot of folks relying on seasonal migrant work. And so that's a perfect space for people to take advantage of folks. Hey, you're going to come do this job. It's going to be great. You're going to make this amount of money, go home. It's going to be awesome. And then that's unfortunately not the case. Again, there's situations where they let someone's documentation expire. They're lied to about what that job is. Then they can create that, you know, climate of fear and all of that once they're there, and it's really hard for them to leave. And yeah, labor trafficking, recruiters, traffickers can look different. It still can be family, it still can be all of that, but it could be also someone who just groomed them into a relationship. They lied to them about what that job is, and then they get really stuck. I don't want to go too much into it, but you may have heard Tebby's story, who shared her story publicly in Bloomington. And gave us permission to share her story as well. And she was trafficked on IU Bloomington's campus. It was labor trafficking. It was involuntary servitude, domestic servitude. She was forced to work out of someone's home, do everything for them, and denied, you know, her right to just come and go as she pleased. Same thing with the documentation came up and lots of issues. So she wasn't able to leave that situation. So it happens here. It can look different. There are similarities and differences, but thank you for asking, because we don't talk about it enough. And we were just guilty of that, right? We often focus on sex trafficking, and we really have both, which goes along with your other question. What resources do we have? Not enough, not many, but we do have like Indiana Legal Services. We can get them T visas, U visas, specific trafficking visas. So there are some resources like that, but we need more. So yeah.
And the National Human Trafficking Hotline serves those who have been labor trafficked as well as sex trafficked. Again, it's a relationship that's built on control and power, and we really have to pay attention to vulnerable populations, be that age, be that somebody who might be undocumented, be that someone who is escaping violence in their home. All of those opportunities create places where folks are vulnerable. And what's really critical that we haven't addressed, and I think we really should think through, is that of who are the buyers? Who are those who are exploiting these individuals? We call it demand reduction. We need to realize that those are the people that we need to target as well. And one of the most important things we can do in our society is not say, oh, this is ugly, I'm not going to talk about it. The more we talk about it, the more folks understand what labor trafficking and sex trafficking look like, the more they understand that it might be right in front of them and they're not even aware of it, the more that we can have an impact in reducing that. And we need to also look at our culture and how it is not uncommon for people to believe that buying sex from someone else is an okay thing. And certainly buying sex and engaging with minors is okay. None of that is. And we need to realize that this is a two-way interaction and that we need to hold people accountable for those actions as well.
That's a great point, that there's two prongs to address. Thank you. There were a couple of allusions to services in recent months at Middleway House being more demanded, and other things, you know, that have changed during COVID. So can you expand a little bit more about that? How has COVID shaped the data, the stories, the demand, and the supply?
You know, it's hard to speak on exactly what it looks like because we're in it right now and we're, you know, flying by the seat of our pants. But I can say that, you know, it's a really lonely, isolating time. And we see so many people ending up in really scary situations after talking to people online. I mean, we've seen it multiple times in just the past few weeks alone. So we do see a lot more abusive behavior taking place online and then manifesting in reality. I mean, like I said before, you know, when COVID first started, our hospital calls really dropped off almost completely. People were terrified to go to the hospital for fear of getting the virus. And now I think with students coming back, our numbers are absolutely skyrocketing. So it's really scary for sure. And this does happen every year a little bit, but it's more stark this year for sure. And we're trying to go with the flow and kind of adjust our services every day to meet the demand.
Okay. If anyone else wants to jump in on that one, or we can move on to another question.
I'd just echo that we were all told to stay in our homes, and that's where a lot of people are being exploited and abused. So that's been really hard. No, they can't call when they're in the same room as the trafficker. And so that's really difficult too, is how do I get help when not only am I maybe experiencing more abuse and more exploitation than normal, I can't do much about it because I'm with that person. And so that's a big part we talk about in services, is getting people away from their trafficker in some way that we can give them opportunity to build rapport, make a disclosure if they felt that was what they wanted to do, things like that. So yeah, it has unfortunately only made things worse in a lot of situations.
And this is, it's a serious offense, isn't it? What types of charges can people face for being a human trafficking offender?
I think our highest right now is a level 4 felony, I don't think we have anything higher than that. And so that's something that a lot of groups are actively working on. We started out with one Indiana statute. Now I think we have 5 different human trafficking specific Indiana statutes. And so that's great. But we have so many loopholes involved in that. We aren't charging and prosecuting many folks either on the trafficking or buying side, just because of the way we are set up. It's underreported, it's misunderstood, things like that. So that's a big part of what we're working on as far as the education piece. ITVAP doesn't directly work on policy change or anything like that. But I think the highest right now is a level 4 felony. Yeah, I think
that's Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add that sometimes this is a difficult crime to charge, identify, and prosecute. And one of the things, especially with kids, that makes it more tangible is the identification of child abuse or sexual abuse imagery. And if that is identified, that does provide that very specific evidence. And there are very specific folks across the state who work together to do those forensic interviews and gather data to make it a little bit easier. I think part of it too is that there's not a strong understanding of what it looks like and at the judge prosecutor level either. And so a lot of times it isn't seen for what it really is. The other big piece when we talk about COVID, vulnerability creates opportunity. And we as a society protect organizations before we protect children and humans. All of those things really set us up for lots of challenges to overcome.
Very interesting. And that's, I think, a great segue to our closer, which, so you pointed out some loopholes and some weaknesses in our system that can care for victims and prosecute the offenders. How can we all be better advocates? How can we get involved? Are there things we need to contact our legislators about right now or year after year? Is there anything, any message that you want to share with the audience to empower us to help you all and help you know, the people hurt by trafficking?
I'll start because mine's pretty brief. Being more on the research side and the community engagement side, one step away from the victims, the big issue is that we all have to start talking and learning about it. There's plenty of resources that have been shared and we can all be reached for additional resources. The other piece is we need to work together. Elaine and I have talked about the importance of getting a regional coalition of community members and professionals to come together and talk about this in an intentional way. And then certainly to pay attention for opportunities to contribute to research so we have the data we need to help people understand the problems.
Great. So if anyone's interested in an effort like that, they could contact you. Okay.
Yes. So building a regional coalition is literally in my title, part of something that would be a really awesome thing to work alongside amazing people like Middle Way House and people doing a lot of that local direct service. So if that's something that interests you, sparks your interest, please let us know. Today you did the first thing that you could do, and you hopefully walk away with some piece of knowledge that you didn't have today. I want to really empower folks to continue to dive into this. Polaris Project is your first stop. That's where a lot of the data we shared today came from. They have lovely, very user-friendly information on their website. Something we didn't get to touch a lot on that I really wanted to today. We of course could talk about this all day. Polaris has an awesome article about how to kind of navigate some of the information that's been circulating on social media. You may be here today because you've heard about human trafficking for years. You may be here today because you saw something on your Facebook feed about human trafficking and you're like, what's happening with this? I also just want to put out a quick message about the importance of accurate information. Just like anything else, we want to be centering the voices of people with lived experience, people who have been working on this issue for years. Please note where the resources you're checking out are coming from. Polaris, again, I know we don't have a ton of time, has a lovely Q&A about this. What about conspiracy theorists who are sharing information about human trafficking? What do we do with that? How do we know if information is accurate? So the reason I share that is because misinformation leads to misidentification. If we're looking for the wrong thing, we're going to keep missing these people, these kids. We're already working with them. We're just missing the human trafficking part of their story. So just wanted to add that as well. You can be a part of ITVAP. We talked about it before. It's a group of awesome humans working together to volunteer their time to work on anti-trafficking efforts, whether that's through training and education, through legislation, through just awareness, whatever it is. We shared, a lot of us sit on ITVAP committees. Check it out. It's really cool. And now with virtual stuff, even though a lot of times they meet in Central Indiana, you can participate that way. And you can we have a mentorship program I was sharing about. It's not statewide yet, but hopefully will be soon. If that's something that interests you, that's another space you can get involved. So ITVAP, being on a committee, talking about coalition building and things like that, please let us know. Sorry, I'll stop.
Excellent. No, that's great. And we'll again include all these resources and opportunities in a follow-up email. And let's give a big round of applause to our wonderful panel. That was super informative, and I hope the audience found the same. Yeah, thank you so much for all that you're doing, for sharing your expertise with us this morning. and for offering to be a resource for connection and education out there. This has been wonderful. Thank you to the Center for the Study of Global Change for the sponsorship of this event. And thank you to our season sponsors at the Bloomington Board of Realtors and the Greater Chamber of Commerce and our friends at IU PACE. Our next Wake Up With United Way is going to be Thursday, November 12th, and it's titled On the Rise, Mental Health and Young Adults. So some themes for sure here that we'll delve into a little more, and we hope you can join us then. The tickets are on our Facebook site as well as Eventbrite. So have a great day, and get out there and spread facts and information and make connections. Thank you.